We are programmed to be entertained, and what entertains us is a program. We are programmed to be entertained, which means that we're programmed to expect our thinking and even our feelings to be produced in advance, for our thoughts and feelings to match up with a set of expectations that we mostly don't question and that we can no longer recall arriving at through our own initiative. We are no longer capable of entertaining, paying attention, or considering. We presume that we are entitled to a buffet of experiences, thoughts, and aesthetic objects that we can passively receive and enjoy without effort. And this expectation cuts against the purpose of art and perhaps of life. Over the last 75 years or so, artists and writers have been wrestling with the fact that we are programmed into passivity as a problem to be overcome, even as most have largely worked within this program. For example, the novelist and poet John Barth explored the feeling of being lost, being distorted by a world that one can't quite take up and consider in his 1968 novella appropriately titled Lost in the Funhouse. And in his 1958 novel, entitled At the End of the Road, Barth presented the claustrophobic feeling that comes along with this state of being entertained through the protagonist Jacob Horner. Horner, an unreliable narrator, is defined by his mental illness. He suffers from a form of paralysis brought on by both philosophical and visceral nihilism. In the first chapter, Horner presents his condition in a clinical setting. Horner relates, "It is impossible to be at ease in the progress and advice room. The doctor sits facing you, his legs slightly spread, his hands on his knees, and leans a little toward you. You would not slouch down because to do so would thrust your knees virtually against his. Neither would you be inclined to cross your legs in either the masculine or the feminine manner. The masculine manner, with your left ankle resting on your right knee, would cause your left shoe to rub up against the doctor's left trouser leg, up by his knee, and possibly dirty his white trousers. The feminine manner, with your left knee crooked over your right knee, would thrust the toe of your shoe against the same trouser leg, lower down on his shin. To sit sideways, of course, would be unthinkable, and spreading your knees in the manner of the doctor makes you acutely conscious of aping his position, as if you hadn't a personality of your own. Your position, then, which has the appearance of a choice because you're not ordered to sit thus, but which is chosen only in a very limited sense, since there are no alternatives, is as follows. You sit rather rigidly in your white chair, your back and thighs describing the same right angle described by the structure of the chair, and keep your legs together, your thighs and lower legs describing another right angle. This approach to solving the difficulty of our passivity was not entirely successful. The socialist critic Christopher Lasch, in his 1979 book, The Culture of Narcissism, holds up Barth as an object lesson, noting that the experimental writer's emotional withdrawal threatens to produce a state of near catatonia in the reader as well as in the author himself. Giving up the effort to master reality, the experimental metafictional writer retreats into a superficial self-analysis which blots out not only the external world, but the deeper subjectivity that Lasch says enables the imagination to take wing. His incursions into the self are as hollow as his excursions into the world. Hello, Sublation Media viewers and readers. It's me again, Douglas Lane, and I want to explain to you what I'm doing in this video and apologize for breaking the rules. According to the online education website vidIQ, a company that offers to help content creators grow audiences and success on YouTube, the key to getting a click on the platform and securing a committed following is to create easily identifiable value propositions and then communicate these propositions clearly through thumbnails and titles. In order to succeed, you need to understand your audience and create a message in your thumbnail that promises a typical viewer that you will provide them with something they want or something they need. For instance, the thumbnail for this video depicts Bob Geldof, the lead singer of the Boomtown Rats, in Nazi regalia as he appeared in the 1982 British live-action, adult-animated surrealist musical drama film directed by Alan Parker and based on Pink Floyd's 1979 album, The Wall. It also features a photograph of President Joe Biden enjoying an ice cream cone. The words, "They're making you fascist" in the thumbnail, along with the title, "How Joe Biden Can Help You Avoid Becoming a Fascist," promised that this video will give you instructions from Joe Biden that will allow you to maintain your anti-fascist credentials. The video title even intimates that it will provide you with a Democratic Party-approved definition of fascism that you can memorize and type into Twitter or Instagram. It promises you that you can appear informed and clever to the thousands of anonymous users that you might want to monetize eventually. All this could be yours if you only watch the video. However, rather than immediately delivering what I promised, I chose to begin with an excerpt from a mostly forgotten novel and discuss a problem that might, at first blush, seem entirely unrelated to the value proposition. I could deliver on this proposition now, of course, for the few viewers that have made it this far, but another trick that vidIQ suggests that YouTube creators use to grow their reach is to increase watch time. So I'm going to delay a bit longer and change the topic again. In the United States, the development of the administrative state dates back to the 19th century. In 1887, future President Woodrow Wilson wrote an essay entitled "A Study of Administration" for the journal Political Science Quarterly. In the essay, he argued that public administration should no longer be taught as a subfield within the political sciences, but that it should instead become its own field of study. Rather than politicians being responsible for administrating the policies of the state, Wilson believed that experts trained in administration should be given the authority to execute the will of the politicians and even to lead them. Public administration was to be treated as a new science. Wilson wrote, "Where government once might follow the whims of a court, it must now follow the views of the nation. And those views are steadily widening to new conceptions of state duty, so that at the same time that the functions of government are every day becoming more complex and difficult, they are also vastly multiplying in number. Administration is everywhere putting its hands to new undertakings. Whatever hold of authority state or federal governments are to take upon the corporations, there must follow cares and responsibilities, which will require not a little wisdom, knowledge, and experience. Such things must be studied in order to be well done." Again, to return to Christopher Lasch, in his book World of Nations, he noted that the science of political administration developed well after the need for an administrative bureaucracy had emerged elsewhere, namely in schools, asylums, and prisons. The need for social control and the development of the institutions and methods required to implement this control arose, paradoxically, from what Lasch described as a rising egalitarianism. Quote, "The rise of egalitarianism in Western Europe and the United States seems to have been associated with a heightened awareness of deviancy and of social differences of all kinds, and with a growing uneasiness in the face of those differences, a certain intolerance even, which expressed itself in a determination to compel or persuade all members of society to conform to a single standard of citizenship." During the 19th century, reformers tried to transform prisons from institutions aimed at confinement and punishment into hospitals for patients laboring under moral diseases. The results of their efforts were often quite the opposite of what was intended, as Francis Lieber noted in Beaumont and Tocqueville's Survey of Prisons. He described the 19th century prison as a plague house in which each person afflicted with the moral disease of criminality was sure to perish from the disorder, and those who arrived there without such a disorder were sure to catch one. Many argue that the difficulties reformers faced as they attempted to introduce scientifically sound forms of therapeutic incarceration aimed at treating the insane and the criminal were primarily caused by the remnants of a culture of punishment, caused by old-fashioned attitudes amongst the population that understood the mentally ill and the criminal elements in society as inferior or subhuman. However, Lasch asks his readers to abandon the Whiggish view of history, which assumes we are always experiencing progress, moving from barbarism to civilization. Instead, we should understand the humanism of these reformers to have emerged from the contradiction that defined the 19th century and that defines the 21st century as well. Another recommendation from vidIQ is that YouTubers aim to develop an interesting storyline in their videos, that they provide a narrative with a protagonist that is easy to identify with. The screenwriter Blake Snyder, author of Save the Cat, recommends using beats in order to tell stories that engage and entertain audiences. The first beat is called the setup. Douglas Lane was born on the steps of Graceland in 1970, and Elvis Presley helped with the delivery. Elvis was the first person to hold the infant Doug, and when Elvis looked into Doug's bright blue eyes and saw the baby's smile, he proclaimed, "This baby is going to do great things." Doug's first act of greatness was to urinate on the King of Rock and Roll's sequined jumpsuit. As Doug got older, the King's prophecy was mostly forgotten. Having been born in 1970, Doug was a part of what became known as a generation of slackers. By the time Doug decided to really make an effort to achieve something in this world, he was already 11 years older than Elvis had been when he died. Worst, he decided to achieve his greatness on YouTube. We have a free society that requires prisons and many other institutions aimed at social control. We have a society based on individualism that requires conformity and sameness. We have a society founded upon scientific inquiry that insists we remain incurious and obedient. Even though there is a desperate need to develop a better understanding, to put the pieces of this world together and get a somewhat different picture, we find ourselves submitting to the ideas offered up to us by the State Department and its algorithms. The concepts, standards, and laws that we rely upon to judge the politics of the moment, and most specifically the so-called geopolitical conflicts we're facing, are products of the same contradictory forms of freedom and progress that we've been saddled with since the late 19th century, and especially since the Second World War. An example of a concept we perhaps unconsciously embrace as we judge the world is the idea that there is such a thing as human nature, and that this human nature is evil. This idea serves the administrators and regulators well. In fact, it was this notion that gave the father of the administrative state a sense of purpose and direction. According to Merle Curdy, author of the essay Woodrow Wilson's Concept of Human Nature, Wilson believed that the minimum core in man's makeup embraces the passions and that his motives arise from these irrationalities. These passions, generally speaking, relate man to the world of the brutes, and the motives springing from these passions might be regarded as the equivalent of the Christian concept of sin. Further, Wilson held that Christian culture had enabled man to realize his better capacities and made him much more an individual than any of the cultures that had preceded it. Wilson did not believe that all men are created equal and therefore should be free to pursue their own happiness. Instead, the best of men, the white Christian men, should set the rules and control the outcomes in society. This perspective informed his geopolitical ambitions after World War I, and in 1917, Wilson addressed the Senate with a speech entitled A World League for Peace. He said, "The equality of nations upon which peace must be founded, if it is to last, must be an equality of rights. The guarantees exchanged must neither recognize nor imply a difference between big nations and small, between those that are powerful and those that are weak. Equality of territory or of resources there, of course, cannot be, nor any other sort of equality not gained in the ordinary peaceful and legitimate development of the peoples themselves. But no one asks or expects anything more than an equality of rights. Mankind is looking now for freedom of life, not for equipoises of power." To divide up the world on this basis of inequality through equality put everything in its right place on the basis of ethnicity and geography, is still the aim of national struggles today. Woodrow Wilson's racism seems as natural and as permanent as the administrative state itself. Even on the left, we are told that certain people belong in certain nations. The freelancer and podcaster Ben Burgess pointed out in his essay for Jacobin magazine entitled "No One's Rights Should Depend on Where Their Ancestors Lived," that right-wing Republicans often refer to Israel's historical claim to Palestinian land in order to justify the war crimes occurring in Gaza. Ben Shapiro, for example, argued that Israel is the ultimate case of decolonization in human history, as the nation was the result of the return of the native population to its homeland and of a battle to throw off the shackles of the British Empire. Burgess notes that Shapiro is using the rhetoric of the anti-imperialist left against the left with this argument, as there are many on the left who are resorting to claims of indigeneity to justify the struggle of Palestinians for equal rights and the struggle for freedom from being bombed. We live in a world defined by what Lenin called petite bourgeois nationalism. He called Wilson's dream of a peaceful new world order under capitalism, with the races of the world safely divided one from another, and each person in his or her right place, a false utopian project built upon evil and prejudice. From Lenin's perspective, Wilson's dream of a League of Nations was merely a call for a truce between capitalist nations, and only an international struggle for workers' power, for a revolutionary transformation of society from the material base up, could overcome the strife and conflict that came to define the 20th and now 21st centuries. But it was Wilson's dream that prevailed. Blake Snyder recommends that a story or film should have a midpoint wherein the main character gets everything they want or doesn't get what they think they want at all. Either way, Snyder says what we think we want is not what it will turn out that we actually need at the end. For example, you might imagine that our hero Douglas Lane has a viral hit on YouTube. Only what produces a hit is a video he throws together in haste, and this video includes a lot of Norm Macdonald jokes.
But you should be seeing a psychiatrist. Why on earth did you come here? And then the ma said, because the light was on.
Doug gives his opinion on these jokes, and people like the video. So now he's presented with a choice. Become a YouTuber who only talks about comedians, maybe only about Norm Macdonald, or squander the success he has finally found. Wait a minute. I should stick with vidIQ's recommendations. That is, you make a value proposition in the thumbnail, and then you deliver on that promise. So, fascism, right? What is it, and how can you avoid becoming one yourself? According to Leon Trotsky, a nation or society is fascist if the workers' organizations within it have been annihilated so that the proletariat is reduced to an amorphous state, and consequently a system of administration is created that penetrates deeply into the masses and serves to frustrate the independent politics of the proletariat. Some of you might be realizing that by this definition, today's world is mostly fascist. And if most of the world is fascist, then it's probably pretty difficult to avoid falling into fascism, even for people who live in nations that call themselves liberal democracies, and even if you read The Guardian or The New York Times every day. Given that most of the world is fascist, you actually might already be a fascist without even meaning to be one, and possibly without even realizing it. Even if you are really self-conscious about how you live your life, even if you recycle and donate to all the right charities and nonprofits, the fascists have their ways, and once they've set up society so that the state manages and regulates and controls most aspects of social life, you're likely to fail to notice what's really going on. This is the part of the video that Blake Snyder would call the bad guys close in. It's the part where doubt, jealousy, fear, and foes, both physical and emotional, regroup to defeat the protagonist. And that's really bad, because I'm the protagonist. Or maybe this is a moment that Snyder would call all is lost, the part where everything I've gained no longer seems to have meaning. My initial goal seems even more impossible than before. this is the part where somebody or something dies. But, and this is important, the death of something old makes way for something new, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. At the outset, I promised to tell you how Joe Biden can help you avoid becoming a fascist. There's a way he can help you. But before I tell you, consider this. Members of Biden's cabinet have spoken off the record to various political insiders and journalists, and what they've reported is that Biden hasn't been running the show for these past 4 years. Most of his staffers rarely see him, and when they do see him, his handlers make sure that everybody sticks to a script that is handed out in advance. That is, not only is the public-facing version of Joe Biden clearly inauthentic and stage-managed, the president has been stage-managed privately as well. The truth is that there is no president in the White House, only a puppet of political insiders and cabinet members and bureaucrats. The truth is exactly what Jay Johnson told CNN. What matters is not who is elected, but who is appointed to run the various agencies that constitute what is sometimes called the deep state, or what we might call the administrative state. But listen, if you feel comfortable today, if your life is going fairly well, then perhaps you should feel comforted to know that the real power in the government operates mostly in secret, is unelected, and prioritizes corporate power and money over any ideology or political project. If, on the other hand, you are unhappy with how things are in the world, if you're made upset by the perpetual wars and massacres, if you struggle to pay your rent or find secure work, if you've lost family members to drug addiction, violence, or avoidable diseases, this is still good news. You are free not to get too invested in the outcome of the upcoming election. John Barth's character in The End of the Road was so paralyzed by the choices in his life, so frightened, that he could not even figure out a way to sit down without evaluating how it would be perceived by his doctor. But now that we know that Joe Biden truly is an empty suit, we might at least feel free enough to sit in any way we want, without concerning ourselves with how the cops and operatives feel about it. Now that we've understood that the politicians and activists are all staged, managed, and controlled by a world order that has been building itself up and falling apart again for over 100 years, we might give ourselves permission to aim at greatness, even if it seems unrealistic. We might give ourselves permission to think past the surface of the situation we're facing and dare to get things wrong and to break the rules. Oh, and if you've enjoyed this video, vidIQ tells me I should encourage you to like, subscribe, and watch another one just like it. In this case, I recommend The Russiagate Hoax Proves the Deep State Runs Society. You'll find a link to it in the bottom left corner in just a second or two. Now wish me luck as I go save the cat. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.